Well, we'll get started then. I'll be out of town next week due to the youth trip in Huntsville, so you get a 2-week break from me. So there you go. There's your first thing to be thankful for. So I wish Preston was in here right now because I heard a preacher joke today, and he's the only one that's going to laugh at it. So it had to do with Christmas time, and it was a minister out in Texas, and he tweeted this, and he said, you know, they always say Santa knows when you're sleeping and he knows when you're awake. So he said, Santa must be a preacher. So, see, I told you only preachers would laugh at that, really. That was a courtesy laugh from all y'all. I get that. I know what that is. It's that. That's not funny. That's not funny. I'm going to laugh just because you said it was a joke. So, I thought it was pretty funny because preachers do know that. Preachers know when you're sleeping and when you're awake. Some of y'all aren't really good at hiding it. I'll just say that. Hey, some of y'all just blatantly sleep, you know. I had a great uncle, at least he would hold the bulletin up like this. I'm like, I know you hadn't been reading that bulletin for 35 minutes. It's only 2 pages, so yeah, you didn't read it that long. Anyway, we're gonna dive into something this week. We have went over our first couple weeks, we've set some groundwork. The first week we established that there is a problem ethically in the world, in the culture that we live in. There is a problem, and we discussed ways that we may be contributing to that problem or being part of the solution to that problem. Last week, we discussed the different ideologies, different statements people will make, different ways people feel about the culture, and how they've adopted this idea of moral relativism, this idea that there is no moral truth, there is no one truth in the world, but everyone has their own individual truth. So my truth is mine and yours is yours, and we have our own moral standard, we have our own moral compass, and we guide our own lives based upon how we feel about things. And we looked at some of the statements that are made, that people will make when they feel that way and how they live their lives. This week and next week probably, because this is going to be a very in-depth study, and I hope it to be, we're going to dive into some scripture, and we're going to look at Christian ethics then. If we've looked at the ethical issues, and we've looked at some of the statements people will make about there is no moral truth, then how do we define what is truth? Is there really a truth? We asked the question last week when we concluded, is there a moral law? Is there really a moral law, a moral standard that we guide our lives by? And if you believe in God, if you believe in the Bible, then we would all say yes. We're going to look at that, and we're going to look at what some might define as natural law. And we're going to talk about that later on in the class. But we're going to try and discover then, if there is a moral law, how do we live by it? What does that look like? As Christians specifically, does that look like the rest of the world, or do we live to an even higher standard? So we're going to discuss some of those things tonight. If you were any sort of student at all, at high school, college, and you took philosophy or anything like that, you know that regardless of how we feel about the stances of these philosophers, Greek philosophers, Roman philosophers, many of these individuals spent their lives trying to discover one thing, and it's how do we think? What is truth? And they're trying to discover something deeper in the universe. What is the meaning of these things? Why do we do this? Why do we say that? Why do we practice these things? Many of them were not just trying to figure out a way to think, but attempting to attach the way that they think to the way that they live. Is there a connection between the way people think and the way people live? Socrates was one of those people. Socrates, his efforts, in my opinion, based upon what I've studied, in trying to determine what virtue was in that, how do we incorporate it into good moral living? One of the things that he attempted to do was he actually said this, given the right philosophy, one can actually live a good moral life. Given the right philosophy, one can live a good moral life. Okay, so regardless of how we feel about these individuals, where they were religiously or whatever, I think Socrates was onto something here. Enter the Bible. Given the right philosophy, one can live a good moral life. Given the right moral standard, one can live a good moral life. And that's what we're going to look at tonight, incorporating the right philosophy that will lead to right living. And the Bible, I think, goes goes above and beyond in telling us how to do this and showing us how to do this. Many people, especially those that are unbelievers, those that do not understand who God is, they see God as like a bully. And we've talked about this in our teen class a lot, is many people have a very skewed view of who God is. They see God as a bully. We like to think of like the mean kid with the magnifying glass on the ants, trying to burn them all up, just trying to see when he can finally invoke his power upon everyone. Many of you maybe even feel like that right now. God is not the mean kid. God is not the mean bully trying to pick on everyone and flaunt his power. The Bible shows us that. God has his specific commands, and we are to live by those commands. But I think the Bible is much more than just the commandment and the rule book of God. What I've learned as I continue to study the Bible is that there is much more about the nature and the character of God than there are his commands. His commands are the bones. But as we see his commands and we learn who God is and what his nature is and what his character is, it starts to add meat to those bones. And we start to see why he gave those commands. Why is it that you tell people to love? Because he's a loving God. Why is it that you tell people to be forgiving? Because he's a forgiving God. Why does he command us to do these things? Because he himself is that kind of being. He himself is that person. So God doesn't just want to lord over us and tell us to do something. What I actually appreciate about my relationship with God is that he doesn't ask me to do anything that he himself hasn't already done. And therefore I know I can do it. So is there a moral law? Absolutely. And God has not only shown us that through his commands, but God has shown us that through his character, and God has shown us that through his Son's character. And that's where we get a lot of our moral living, is from his Son. We are Christians. We are attempting to live a life in the way of Jesus Christ every day. That is the reason we identify ourselves as Christians. And so, yes, there is a moral standard. There is a way to live. And God has shown us that through so much more than just his commands. And so many people just look at God as this really commanding being. But if we look at the life of Jesus and how we follow Jesus, and we're going to look at some of these things, Jesus never asked us to do anything that he didn't do first, that he himself did not do first. And I find so much hope and I find so much meaning in that it's not just a God trying to boss us around. So we're going to look at some of those things in just a second, but I want to share some things with you before we get there. I believe this sheds light on Jesus's, when he's preaching to us and he's trying to show us, be the light of the world, be the salt of the earth. We are even told in the letters of Paul, we are the ambassadors. We are those that God is making his appeal through. As we look at the character of Jesus, the character of God, and the commands and the law now, that we can say there is a moral law, there is a moral standard, I think that gives so much more meaning to the job that we've been given, to the opportunity that we've been given to be Christians and to be his spokespeople. He says, the world says, why do you believe in this? Tell them why. Why do you practice life this way? Tell them why. Show them why. That we are examples. We are the spokespeople that they say, you live life differently than everyone else. Why is that? Because I have a different moral standard than most of the world does. That is the only way. Let's just be real about it right now. As we are about to embark on this journey here, that is the only way the world is ever going to know the nature and the character of God and why he says what he says. It's through us. And through us telling people, through us showing people, and making sure those two things match up with one another. And that's something we're going to look at as we go through this. So as opposed to moral relativism, as we talked about last week, moral relativism is subjective. It is subjective. Christian ethics, objective. So regardless then, what does that mean? What does that mean? Christian ethics is objective. It means that there is a moral law. So regardless of how we feel about it, regardless of how we practice, regardless of the response toward those things, it doesn't change. Truth is truth no matter what. Right is right, wrong is wrong. It does not change. It does not waver with the culture. It does not waver with people's response and feelings toward it. It is truth. Christian ethics are objective. Let's give some examples. Sexual practices, how people conduct themselves sexually. One of the things that has been talked about for the last 10 years, if it feels right, it must be right. That's one of the more common statements. If it feels right, it must be right. That can even be said of homosexuality, people's sexual orientation. If it feels right, it must be right. So we determine the moral law, the moral standard, based upon how people feel about it. Now you think about that just in the small group of people we have in here right now. If we were to table something right here and discuss it and try to determine is it right or wrong based upon people's feelings toward it, we're not going to come to any sort of conclusion here tonight. One of the ones that, just a funny one, that I'd been reading about, one of the professors gave us a list. Coke is better than Pepsi. We'll sit here and argue that one until we're blue in the face. Some of you really love Pepsi. Some of you really love Coke. One of them, Hawaii is the best vacation destination in the whole world. Some may agree and some may not. And so we will table something here, we will discuss it, and we'll never come to any sort of conclusion because all of our feelings are going to be different toward it. But truth is truth. And no matter how you feel about it, specifically, let's say the sexual practices, homosexuality, truth is truth no matter what. Right is right, wrong is wrong. So regardless if you feel it's okay to practice sex before marriage, that's the way you feel, but it doesn't make it right. And it'll never be right. If you feel it's okay to be a homosexual, that's the way you feel. But right is right and wrong is wrong. And it'll never be right regardless of how many people promote it, regardless if it gets legalized in every state, in every country in the world. It'll never be right. It'll never be right. One of the very simple things I tried to pick out is gossip. Some people will say, well, if it's true, then it's not gossip. If you're talking about someone to someone else without their knowledge, whether it be good or bad, specifically bad, it doesn't matter if it's true. Gossip is gossip. Right is right, wrong is wrong. And so no matter how we spin it, no matter how we feel about it, right is right, wrong is wrong. Truth is truth. And it'll never change regardless of how we spin it or how we feel. And that is how we're working now within Christian ethics. That is the mentality we must adapt. Because, let's be real, as culture goes on, we have far too many Christians willing to compromise truth. And we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. We're not willing to compromise it until it really affects us. I'll stand firm on homosexuality until maybe one of my siblings decides they're gay. And then maybe I might have to change my mind. I'll stand firm on the fact of sex before marriage is wrong until my child gets pregnant before marriage. And then I have to justify that it's okay. We stand strong until it really impacts our life. And let's be real, right now, at some point in your life, all of our lives, we're going to be impacted by one of these things. There are many things in the world that are culturally right, but are scripturally wrong, that we're going to be challenged with, we're going to be faced with, and we must make a decision now. What is truth? We teach our kids that all the time, don't we? Make a decision before it happens. If you wait until you're in the back of that person's car and they prompt you with premarital sex, you're not going to say no. We tell them that. Have a decision. Before somebody offers you the drink, you need to have your mind made up. Are you going to drink or are you not? Before somebody offers you the joint, you need to have your mind made up. We teach that to our young people all the time, and we as adults have a hard time doing that when we're faced with something as difficult as this. When our child comes to us and says, I think I'm gay. And then we start to compromise a little bit. And better have your mind made up, because it's going to affect you. It's going to hit you in some way, form, or fashion as life goes on. Especially as the world is carrying on the way that it is, we can almost bank on it that it's going to happen that way. This is difficult. It's always been difficult. And this is why it requires us to clarify now. When we talk about Christian principles, we're going to look at some of these things in Scripture. We need to clarify what is right, what is wrong, what is truth. And we're going to look at some of these things. From the smallest issues like lying and gossiping to abortion and premarital sex and adultery and all of those things. We've got to look at these and make a decision. What is truth? Where do I stand in this truth? Because we must remember we are humans and we have a really, really hard time not deceiving ourselves and not trying to rationalize every decision that is made. You think about that. We like to look at young people a lot and look at the decisions they make and look at the excuses they give, but we as adults are the same way. When we do something really stupid, and I'm going to use that word, when we do something really stupid, we ourselves like to backtrack and start rationalizing everything that we did. Well, I did it because of this and that, and that person, well, they prompted me with this, and da-da-da-da-da, and we backtrack, and we tell lies, and next thing you know, we're all the way back there, and we don't even remember what we were arguing about up here. We don't even remember why we were rationalizing it. Because we want to rationalize it. We want everything that we say and do to be right. We don't want to be wrong. We don't want to be held to a standard. We don't want to be accountable. Even as children of God, we struggle with allowing God to be the Lord of our life. We struggle with allowing God to be the image that we're made in and being His reflection in the world and reflecting His Son and that gospel in the world, because there may be some personality traits we're going to have to change. There may be some things that we practice, some ways that we live that we're going to have to get rid of, and we don't want to be called out for that. We don't want to have to adapt our life for that, even as Christian people. And that's where in this, as we talk about Christian ethics, let's get to the meat of it. We're not talking about the world now. For the next 2 weeks that we're in here, we're talking about us. This is not about the world, because if the world doesn't believe in Jesus, Christian ethics don't apply. They're still held to that standard. They will be when judgment comes, but they don't care. We should. As Christian people, we should care. And we should really strive for that standard that God wants us to live by. And we go above and beyond that moral standard. John chapter 14, verse 6. Anybody quote that right off the top of their head? What was that? Yes, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So Christian ethics then demands a definition, and it demands constant evaluation. As Christian people, we should not just say, this is the standard, and just hope we live by it. Being a Christian demands constant evaluation. Are we being the person that God has called us to be? How did I do with that today? How can I be better tomorrow? The devil works on us so hard that we need to evaluate every night, every morning, in the middle of the day, who am I in the scope of the kingdom right now? How am I contributing to the kingdom, or am I not? It demands constant evaluation. This is a difficult life to live. I've said this before, that I think we do a great injustice to young people and to unbelievers alike, whether they be young, old, whatever, is that we build Christianity up to be such a positive and happy existence in which it is, that a lot of times we forget to tell them how hard it's going to be. And when the devil smacks them right in the mouth for the first time, it's like, you didn't say this. You didn't tell me this was going to happen. You said that my life was going to change for the better, and now I'm struggling even more than I was before. And then they bail. We need constant evaluation of our lives, because this is a difficult life to live. And we need to address that. We need to state that in our own life. It's hard. This is hard to do. Thinking about all the things that the culture is promoting right now, and if we were to stand against it, we would stand a very few against so many. And that would be a hard decision to make. Because we'd have some family members and some really close friends standing on the other end of the line. This is hard. So what is the standard that we use to evaluate ourselves? Jesus says, I'm the way. He was talking to his disciples, and he says, I'm going to go away for a while, and you know where I'm going. And they said, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? We want to follow you, Jesus, so how do we know the way? And he says, I am the way. How do you evaluate yourself? How do you get to the place you want to be? How do you get to be where I am? Follow me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets there except through me. I'm going to give you some homework for the next 2 weeks. If you want to dive in deep, we don't have enough time to do this. You want to dive in deep to this message right here that Jesus kicks this off with, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Go home and read the next 2 weeks, John 14, 15, and 16. John 14, verse 6, but John 14, John 15, and John 16, and he will just lay it out on the table. This is the kind of person I want you to be. This is how you live ethically as a Christian in a world that's so evil. And I can promise you, you'll be edified, you'll be uplifted by the words of Christ in these 3 chapters. I just want to read just the first part of this with you, if you'll allow me to. Let's just read this out loud so you can see where Jesus is going. They say, we don't know where you're going. He says, you know where I'm going. He says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. So Philip argues with him, well, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Jesus said, have I not been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, or else believe on account of the works themselves. Truly I say, anytime you see the words, truly, truly, or verily, verily, when Jesus is speaking, highlight that verse, because he says this is of the utmost importance right here. Truly I say, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do. And greater works than these will he do, because I am going to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. So he says, okay, so you want to know how to do it? Here it is. If you love me, if you want to follow me and you want to follow in the way, you want to know the way there, if you love me, keep my commandments. I will ask the Father. He will give you a helper to be with you forever, even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him or knows him. You know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you yet a little while, and the world will see me no more, but you will see me because I live, and you also will live. In that day you will know that I'm the Father. I'm in the Father, and you in me, and I in you. Whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him. This is just touching the garment here. How do we do that? Jesus, how do we know what is truth? I am truth. Well, how do we know how to follow truth? Follow my way. Okay? How do we follow Jesus' way? If you don't know this yet, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, overloaded with the works of Jesus, overloaded with the love and the compassion and the mercy of Jesus. Read the gospel again. How do you get there? You treat the world like Jesus treated the world. You see the world like Jesus saw the world. That's where it gets hard. You see, that's where we have a hard time becoming like Christ, is because we like to see things as they are. Jesus saw people for who they could be. We see a prostitute. Jesus sees forgiveness and a woman who can change her life and a woman who can change the world. We see a beggar. Jesus sees someone who can be fed and be edified and uplifted and taught and changed to do something good. We need to learn to see the world through the eyes of Jesus. First off, how to live ethically as a Christian in the world. Stop seeing the world the way the world sees the rest of the world. See the world through the eyes of Jesus. That would be point number one. In my opinion, where do we start? Learn to look through the eyes of Jesus. That's John chapter 14. Read 14, 15, and 16, and he'll give you the what and the how. The early church was identified as the way. Before they were called Christians, they were called followers of the way. They were identified as the way. To me, that marks two things. It was consistent with people living within the will and the way of God. There were people in the world that were living consistently within the will of God and the way of God that he had taught them how to do. And the second thing is in doing so, it marked a separation between them and the rest of the culture. They were called the way because they were seen differently. The rest of the world viewed them as different because they didn't live like the rest of the world, the rest of the culture. They didn't see the world like the rest of the culture. And so they called them followers of the way because they were extremely different. Point number 2, you better get comfortable with being different. You better get comfortable with being different. Christian ethics is a matter of one's conduct. It's a matter of one's character. Or this is how to practically apply it. Christian ethics is a matter of how one behaves and believes, and if those things complement or contradict one another. If we want to talk about what Christian ethics actually is, Christian ethics is a matter of looking at someone's conduct, at how someone behaves, and how they profess to believe, and do they match up? Do they match up with one another? Do they contradict? The church has made great strides forward with people whose conduct matches. But it's also taken some great steps backward and been given a stain because of people whose conduct contradicts what they say they believe. Well, I believe in God, but not enough to change this or that. Not enough to stop talking like this or watching that or hanging out here and professing to be okay with that. There's a lot of different things that as Christians that we need to see through the eyes of God and learn to say no to, regardless of if the world sees it as right or wrong, regardless of how the world feels about it. Truth is truth, right is right, and wrong is wrong. One's life must complement or reflect their faith. I think we see that. So if we have a philosophy of right thinking that leads to right living, okay, we got that. It's in the Bible here somewhere. One's life must complement or reflect their faith. Can anybody give me a passage of that? Yeah, so is he. James chapter 2 is full of it. Faith without works is dead. You cannot say you believe and not let your works and your conduct back it up. James chapter 2 is full of that. Romans chapter 1. I want us to look at this passage, if you will, really quick. If you've ever read the book of Romans, Paul gets pretty hardcore. And he starts off with a bang. This is not, I'm going to start off with my sermon and go soft and kind of build up, and then at the end drop the hammer. This is chapter 1. And he drops the hammer right out of the gate. Right out of the gate on these people. Talking about how your conduct better match your faith, how your works better match what you say you believe in. Beginning in verse 16, he said, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith." The righteous shall live by faith. Here's the turn. "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and all unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." Is he talking about unbelievers? No, he's not. They suppress the truth because they know the truth, and they're living unrighteously anyway. "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore God gave them up in their lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. For this reason God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness." Before we continue in this, one's life must complement and reflect their faith. These people suppressed the truth, knowing the truth, and let their passions take over, and let these worldly desires and how the culture felt it was okay to live, to lead them in that direction, and God allowed it to happen and gave them up to their debased minds and penalized them for it. The world may have been changed here to see God as nothing but just someone else's futile ideology because of just a few people's compromise of the truth. All it takes is a few. All it takes is a few here. Do you have something, sir? Go ahead.
In Ecclesiastes 12:13, we know that about, do to your man, fear God, and keep his commandments. Well, that's the front of that is the main problem. No one fears God.
There you go. Yeah.
Not scared of God.
There you go. That is a great point. That I agree with that wholeheartedly. We don't fear God until we're faced with death. I find that so interesting. That you'll have people go to their knees and beg for forgiveness and salvation. People believe in God when they're faced with death, because I believe people inherently know good and evil, and they know there is a God, but no one cares to fear Him enough to live that way until it's too late. So we see some of these things take place. Look at the things he describes here as we wrap up class here. Look at the way people are living, not just these homosexual, immoral things, sexual relations they're doing. But look at the things he talks about. He says they were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, and malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and maliciousness. These are evil people. They are gossips. I love the fact that God saw fit through all of His writers to not just do what we do and name the really bad with the really bad, and we never talk about the things that are just as bad. Murder and strife. Oh, wait, gossip? Yeah, I believe that one was in there. God don't like that. Slanderers. What does that mean? Oh, somebody that basically gives a false report of someone else behind somebody else's back. We call that a backbiter. That happens a lot. We see that in the church. Haters of God. Insolent. Anybody know what insolent is? Disrespectful. Yeah. Basically a lack of respect for authority or anyone else. We've got this disrespectful being. They're haughty. They're boastful. Inventors of evil. Disobedient to parents. We don't have any kids in here. That one's listed. That one, to me, there you go. We're listing all of the sin that God is talking about with these people. Not only were they consumed with homosexuality and immoral sexual relations and murder and strife and all of this hate, but they were slanderers and gossip. They were disrespectful, they were haughty, they were disobedient to their parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, and ruthless. Though they know God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice them. Let's end with that one really quick after you speak. No, you're right. Amen to that, sister. If I were disobedient to my parents right now, it would be a bad thing. I agree. Very much so.
And then the Jews have a problem with not honoring their parents, wanting to get away from having to take care of them financially and saying, "Or to the temple." So there's a respect for parents such to the point that they're dead.
Glad you brought that up. Later on in our study, we're going to talk about when your parents get older, how do we treat those people? How do we take care of them and provide for them as Christian people? Thank you for bringing that up. That'll be a segue into that one. Yes, sir. That's right. Yes, sir. Thank you for sharing that one as well. I want us to really take in here the culmination of this chapter, this passage, and how Paul wraps up this chapter, even though it wasn't divided. It's chapter 1 right here. But look how he ends this statement. He talks about all of these things these people are a part of, and then he says, though they know God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice them. You know what that tells me? Give your child approval to be gay. You're included in this now. Give the approval for an abortion to happen. You're included in this now. Celebrate immoral actions when they happen. You're included in this now. Promote evil living and socially, culturally acceptable living in the world. You're included in this now. God not only saw fit to choose the people and to point out the people that practice these things, but what leads the majority of the culture this way to practice these things is because nobody will stand up against it, but rather they say, I don't want to be a part of that, but if you want to do it, go ahead. I don't have any problem with you doing it. With those of us who approve such things, we are just as evil and immoral as those who practice. Something to consider. I don't believe God wrote it down for nothing. That those who approve and condone such actions are just as guilty as those who do them. Something for us to consider as we live our life, even as we go to the polls to vote for such things, whether it be a candidate or such things that they're trying to promote or get passed. Something to consider. That we'll be judged for the decisions that we make and the things that we promote. Go ahead.
What verse are you using for that last statement you said about we're just as guilty if we don't?
In verse 32, the very end of that. That these people not only do them, they give approval to them. Verse 32 at the end of that chapter. Any questions before we end? I let this one get away from me. This one's going to have to save until next time. Yes, sir.
I cannot understand how a man can supersede what God has, through the Holy Spirit, given to these men to write in the Holy Bible.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I agree. We have a moral law, and this is, we're going to wrap this up in 2 weeks, but we have a moral law. We have a moral standard. It's right here. There is truth in the world, and we have it. It's just a matter if we choose to live by it. Yes, sir. Okay. By keeping silent on such things? This is where I think we would start to agree and disagree. I would say yes. I would say yes. Personally, yeah. I mean, if we're not speaking out, then we're allowing it to happen. I mean, we tell our teenagers that, stand up for what's right. If you go to the party, I tell people that all the time. If you go to the party and you don't drink, and you don't stand up against the drinking, and you say, well, I went to the party, but I didn't drink, where were you? You're still at the party. You were still at the party where the sexual acts and the social drinking, the underage drinking was happening. You didn't say anything. You didn't participate in it. You're still there. It's called what?
Tacit consent. It literally just means consenting by not saying.
There you go. I'm going to leave that verbiage to you. Very good. So, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yeah. Consenting without saying a word. And so, yeah, I think we do that. And I think that's just... Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Any other comments before we dismiss? Amen to that. This thing is not even go. So, yeah. All right. Yeah. If there's nothing else, you guys have a great holiday. We'll see you in 2 weeks.